Greetings and blessings, my brothers and sisters in Christ. I am Robert, and this is the I Am Matthew podcast, where we talk about walking out our Christian faith and trying to be in the world, but not of the world. All right, guys, this is bonus episode time again. So currently I am sitting at the main Life Point, part of Life Point Church. We have this kind of meeting room. It's actually really nice. It's a really nice, comfortable room. And I also want to take a second and say that due to some generous donations, actually the gear that I have for my mobile rig, it's a whole lot simpler to set up. Whenever I did bonus episode 2 with Jeremy, it took me almost, 30, 45 minutes. This was set up in a matter of minutes. It's very easy. And of course, I'm not alone. I have an amazing brother in Christ that has agreed to come on and share his testimony. So let me talk about Shane. And I think how we really started to get to know each other was the worship team. I was connected to Shane through Christ. I heard about the fact that he had been to prison as well. And now he's making a life for himself. And plus, when he opens his mouth and begins to speak, you're going to tell that he's spent some time with the Lord. So, Shane, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks for having me, man.
And
the feeling is mutual as well.
Well, I appreciate it, man. I know that from all of our time, whenever we did discipleship groups, I know you'll get into that. I just really wanted to have you on here just because I love your take on things a lot of the time. Like I said, every time you say something, I'm blessed by it. So I know that, so my thoughts was, hey, I want to get this guy on here because he's going to have something for somebody to get blessed by. So
yeah, absolutely. And to God be the glory.
Absolutely.
In all that he's doing and will do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So, I guess let's start about your testimony. Who's Shane Midgyett, right? That's right. Yes.
You got it. Some people say Midgyett, but we've converted it to Midgyett.
There you go.
So it seems to be a little bit easier to say. So I'm Shane Midgyett, and originally from Chillicothe, born and raised here. Two great parents that I was born in the 70s, so I like to say, at that time everything was all right. So
everything was groovy.
Everything was groovy. But grew up in that time, and around a lot of people, grew up in a big family of extended, cousins and a lot of cousins, a lot of uncles and aunts. And one thing I do remember and suppose at the time grew fond of was that, I had a lot of people around me. We had a lot of kids, older than me, my age, and just, really spent a lot of time with them growing up. We spent a lot of time in the backyard. We spent a lot of time, for lack of a better word, in some places we probably shouldn't have been, but, that
happens no matter what generation that happens.
Yeah. But I do remember just growing very close to, people in my extended family and spending a lot of time with them, a lot of nights. A lot of sleepovers, a lot of nights at other folks' house, and just really got used to doing that. There was always somebody in our home, and so I thank God for that now. I think back at how we did provide for people who at the time was having a hard time or struggling. But I grew up seeing a lot of things that a kid my age should not have been seeing.
Yeah.
With being raised in a really big family. Again, I had great parents. My dad, he worked 8 hours a day, worked 33 years at the same job, but it gave us a lot of time to be doing things that. And spending time doing things that we probably shouldn't have been doing and seeing a lot of things. And so as I kind of grew up, I began to kind of adopt some of these things and later on in life, it really did become detrimental. And so, I think about, by the time I got into high school, had my first drink at 14 years old, my first intentional drink, I say.
Yeah.
I grew up around a large family, so we had a lot of get-togethers and a lot of drinks that were laying around. And you get thirsty as a kid. You're outside, you're running around, you come in and you just grab the first thing you see and you think it's tea and it's actually not,
Yeah.
And so I did have those occasions, but, for the most part, my first real intentional drink was at 14 years old. And I think that at that time I really wanted to, pick up my own life and begin to do what I had already been seeing done. And of course, with all of my spins and takes that I added to it, it became kind of my own at that time, kind of my own destructive path that I started to go down. And I was, one thing that's interesting is that God had given me a real, a gift to be talented. I was very, very talented in everything that I did in terms of sports. And I can remember running around as a kid and always being, the fastest or, the highest jumper or, the most athletic. And so I began to use this in high school and became really successful at it, and so, in baseball, I grew up playing baseball and enjoyed that sport and became really successful. And then, of course, in high school, we had, football that we were, I was a 2-time champion. I mean, we seen state championships, all the time and growing up. And I think even though, I had things beginning to cultivate that were negative in my life, I really gravitated to, the things that I was good at. And so to some degree, I was popular in that aspect. I was respected because I was good at what I did, and helped, be successful in our teams and things. And so, one thing that I noticed that after I graduated high school and all that went away, all that fame, all of that attention, really what I began to shape and mold myself to be was gone.
Yeah.
And so I really felt like I was going through a depression after I graduated high school because sports was gone. And all I had was the bottle at that time. All I had was partying at that time, and all I had was the women to chase after, and I changed. I think I began to try to fill that void of what was important to me now, and I oftentimes, even in my testimony at CR, I talked a little bit about kind of growing up and the way that I grew up in terms of like having a black dad and a white mother and going kind of through some of those elementary stages of life where I didn't really feel, completely black because the rest of my family was, but I wasn't completely accepted either, in this small rural community.
Yeah.
And so I really did, I think, deep down look for that, that acceptance, like somewhere where I was accepted. And I found that in being good in sports. And so when I lost that, it was, really very, very pivotal moment in my life when I really started to pick up other drugs. I started to pick up, other things in my life that kind of led me down the wrong way.
Yeah. So I mean, the thing is that happens a lot to people is that, for sports that, they get all in and get in that. And then it's like, they get out and it's just like, okay, well, I was good at this. This is what I was good at. And then, how am I going to fill that void? And so, and then people like other things just, when you don't fill it with the right things, the devil loves to just shove stuff in there. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely what happened. And so because, my mom, she really was a big advocate of continuing in school. She didn't go to college. And so she really wanted her children to be successful. And so, I already kind of felt the burden of going to college. And it was kind of like, I really don't want to do this. I don't have the heart for it. I'm not mentally ready to go on to higher learning and continuing in school. But I did. And it was shortly after I had completed my first semester that I was already starting to get back into what, I was doing before that, and ended up finishing my first year of college. And, during that summer, ended up going AWOL a little bit, and got a phone call from my mother.
Well, when you don't want to go to school, I mean, the last thing you're going to do is, well, go to school. So, I mean, that's just what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, my mom, she called me one day. She said, "Are you going to go back to school? You're about a week out from registration. What are you doing?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to get back." And so it was shortly after that first semester that that Kathy had gotten pregnant with DL, our first son. And
you haven't mentioned Kathy. So Kathy's your wife. When did you meet your wife?
So I met my now wife in high school.
Oh, okay.
Right. So we met in high school. She was kind of the girl in the neighborhood. I knew Kathy already.
Yeah.
I just didn't I knew of her, but I didn't know her personally, and stuff. And so we ended up starting to go together my sophomore year of high school. And so she was my high school sweetheart. If you will.
Okay. All right, that's cool.
Yeah. So and I'll talk a little bit more about, really where I feel like Kathy was, where she started to be kind of this, she became a part of what was going on in my destructive life.
Yeah.
And so she got pregnant going into my second year of college, and that was my reason to drop out, and so I did, and just got back to the grind here in Chillicothe, and began to raise a kid. And then about a year and a half after that, here come Danielle, and so we're full blown at this point in the world, not knowing God and trying to raise two kids on our own, and we loved our children, but we didn't have the right priorities in place, and Kathy was always working. She was always, she always had a job, and so I was the one that did most of the running around and kind of set that bad example, and so I just felt like that, as we started to try to build a family, that at some point in time it fell off the rails because just kind of some of those bad influences that I was bringing into the home, and she was watching me do, and it just really made things unbalanced, very unbalanced. I would come home oftentimes with a very hurtful, scornful, at that time, girlfriend, and we had two children, and we was trying to live it out and stuff. And so, as time went on, it would go in and out of work. I mean, I, would have jobs, and then the addiction would, take over. And it was almost like for me that I couldn't do it halfway. It wasn't a weekend thing for me. I went hard, so.
I mean, and the thing is, it's all different for everybody. There's some people that, what do they call them, functional alcoholics, and then there's like the then there's the non-functional, I guess.
Right. Exactly. I seen a lot of this growing up, and a lot of this was traits that that I seen older people doing, that I took on and did.
Yeah.
So I was basically just redoing what I had already seen in my younger life. And just starting it all over again with my children and my home. And that pattern it continued clear up until I was saved. But
it's generational curses is what it is.
That's what it was.
Generational curses.
That's absolutely what it was, Robert. And I know now that Christ he became cursed for us, that this curse could be broken. And it was through the power of his resurrection that I was able to to be set free and to break this curse, to break the bonds that keep us doing the same things over and over and again, generation after generation.
Yeah.
And I didn't see that until I, surrendered my life to Christ. But we, at one point in time, had moved on, to Columbia at this point. We wanted a new start. And Kathy had gotten a job in Jefferson City, even though we were living in Columbia at a central office working for the state of Missouri. And so I myself thought I was going to, try my hand at going back to school again. And so we moved, and Kathy was working. She worked for a few years there, and then eventually moved her job. She still worked for the state of Missouri, but she got a job in Columbia, where she didn't have to travel. But Shane was doing his thing. I mean, I was working, but still trying to run the streets. I was working, but still trying to do things on the side, and still all the while trying to, love, my kids, and raise them in the way that I was supposed to. And so, a lot of things were going on outside of our family that I was bringing back home, and it was just really making the relationship between Kathy and I very toxic, because she, no matter how much I didn't talk about it or didn't show it, she knew. She knew what I was doing, and it just made our relationship very toxic, and it at one point in time completely shut down altogether. I had moved out and went to Kansas City for a while, lived with my brother, and was really completely out there at one point in time, to where I couldn't even really say I'm going back home. I just chose the streets. And, I think about, now, what was he running from? What was he doing at that time that caused him to run, And I think a lot of it now is just what I seen people doing when I was younger, but also the anger and the disappointment in not being what I wanted to be. I was really striving to work hard to live up to an image that I created myself.
Yeah.
And it was never what God had intended or planned for my life. And ultimately it came to a stop, a few years after we had moved to Columbia. And so as time went on, God was continuing to provide, as we didn't realize he was, but he was. And there would often be talk about going to church, and I was so set in believing that God had given me this hand, that this was the hand that I had dealt, that I was really trying to work hard and to strive at playing every card right that I had, not knowing that it really wasn't the cards that he had dealt me, but that Satan had his grips on me, that he had lied to me, and he had lied not only to me, but he had lied to my generation, the people that I grew up with and around, and that this was the way. And I tried to live it out to the best that I possibly could, only to realize later that it was an absolutely detrimental and destructive path.
Oh, I get it. I mean, you know what? It happens. I mean, that's whenever, Christ isn't really that much prevalent, or even if Christ is prevalent, whenever the majority of what we're taking in, the devil has set the scene for, I mean, that's the reality that we're going to go for. It's very easy to accept everything around you as what's been handed to me, and so you say, okay, well, I got to deal with it in this way. I mean, in a lot of ways that echoes, some of my testimonies. So I completely understand where you're going.
Yep. And I would add in there too, that by this time that we had moved to Columbia, I had already been to prison one time. I had wrecked my car, flipped it, busted all the windows out of it. I had 2 or 3 guys with me at the time. It ended up being, I believe, like my 3rd DWI by this time. And it ended up being what I thought was going to be a felony, but anyway, I ended up getting, before I even had went to court, I had ended up getting another DWI before that, before I had even made it to court. And so by the time I got to court, they realized, oh, you have 4 now. And so they ended up basically, deeming me as a persistent offender, and they ended up, giving me a felony and convicted me of that felony to do 5 years in institution. So I ended up doing a 120-day shock treatment where I got out on probation, and then about a year and a half later, I violated that probation with a dirty UA, and that's when they revoked my probation, sent me down for the 5 years. And so that second time that I got out, it's interesting because at that time I really knew that I had a problem, right? And at the time I thought that I still had the resources and a way to fix it. Not knowing that I really didn't.
How can I do this better?
Exactly.
That's what was probably going through your head. How can I do this better?
Yep.
Yeah. I hear that all the time in prison. It's just like, how can I do that better?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Problem is the I.
Well, I did it. Relatively speaking, I did it about 2 weeks better.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
I knuckled it for about 2 weeks, and then I decided I can't live this way.
Yeah.
I've got to do something. I got to go out. I got to live here. And I started to relocate my stomping grounds out of town. So I was going to other places and getting drunk and living and running the streets, and started to do it that way. And so eventually, again, we decided, what, we're kind of headed a dead end here in Chillicothe. Let's start new somewhere else. And so before the kids got too much older, and before they got into grade school, we had moved to Columbia. And so that's where we kind of started, quote unquote, a new life there. But it didn't change what we were doing. It didn't change our relationship. And so
changing locations, but not changing the problem, still ends up with the same thing. Same solutions.
Absolutely. And it actually made it worse because I was now traveling to different places that I couldn't get to when I was in Columbia. So I didn't change the places that I was going. I just added travel now, and so I put myself even in greater harm, and it took me longer to get back to where I was coming from. And so, now one overnight and I'm back, ended up all weekend gone, and I'm back on Monday morning. And so, what a catastrophe that this became on, Kathy and I's relationship. But I do realize now that everything that I had undergone as a kid and all the experiences of my life, all the things that I had went through, put myself through, that I was incapable of taking care of Kathy. I was incapable, of giving her what she needed. And and that's why it ended to really our detriment. And so, long story short in all of this, one evening, I probably should say one early morning in the middle of the night, I had came home and I was completely intoxicated. I mean, and came in and basically disrupted the home at that point. And all I needed to hear was Kathy one more time asking me what's wrong with me, before I finally just snapped. I picked up a TV, threw it across the room. I did all kinds of other physical things and just absolutely snapped. And kids were in the home, and it was interesting that God, is so almighty and all knowing that He knew time was going to come, and he protected my children. I mean, they did not wake up one time through this whole thing, and we still to this day try to figure out how in the world, as small as this home was, how, you know, these children didn't wake up, and how many times they've, you know, have before.
Yeah, meaning that before one little thing happens and they're up, but
exactly,
you throw in a TV across the room and they're dead to the world. So
yeah,
that's only God, man. That's
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I can really go on and on and talk about stories, you know, about these late nights when I would come in, and even sometimes when, you know, coming off of a hard weekend, coming in and still being high, and trying to manage family life when I still had the streets on me, and how difficult that was, and how absent I was when I was just right there, you know, and how that had an effect on not only Kathy, but how it had an effect on the whole family dynamic when I was there, but I wasn't there.
Yeah.
Right. I was still fighting, you know, the streets off of me. And so this was just another time, but it ended up being the very last time. And I subsequently ended up getting arrested that evening because Kathy had had enough, and, you know, some of the things that she was still going through, and just finally had enough. And so the cops came and they arrested me for domestic violence, disturbing the peace, and they sent me to jail. Mind you, I was still on parole status, so I had a probation officer. I was still reporting, but I was reporting in Kansas City, and so I was, even though I was back in Columbia by this time, I was still traveling to go report. And so 2 months go by before I, you know, had made it back to the PO to report, and because they hadn't established the PO back in Columbia yet, and so on one morning, a little known to me, you know, that would be my last day, you know, out on the streets, and it would really be my second to last day living this lifestyle that I was living. And so went to report, and got there, and no more sat down. And she said, "Mr. Midgyett, we're, you know, violating your parole for parole violation." And there were two cops that were behind the partition, you know, next to me, that came and they cuffed me. And of course, at the time, I was still living for the world, and I was living in the world. And so I let her know how I felt about her, and then they took me on the way, and I went to Jackson County Jail, and they booked me there. But because I was on parole status, I didn't stay. They just sent me straight back to prison after that, which is what they do when you're on parole status. You don't stick around very long. You just go right back. And that's what I did. But, you know, Robert, I've talked about this before. I've told you, you know, we've talked about this, is that feeling that I had that day was a feeling that I had never experienced in my life. And I know now that was the bottom of my life, where I had completely ran out of resources, where I completely ran out of strength. I completely ran out of ideas. And that was the only thing that was supporting me this whole time. That was the only thing keeping me from the bottom, was these resources, was this inner strength that I had, the stubbornness, the hard-headedness to continue this life. That was the only thing keeping me from touching the bottom. And when I finally realized that I'm done, is this really my life? Is this really it? Right? Because I know I have nothing left.
Yeah.
I actually felt for the first time the bottom of my life that day. I was so empty. I couldn't talk. People would say things to me and I didn't have the words. I mean, I was completely sunk. And so I endured that day because it was that morning. I endured that day. And then the very next day they came and they packed us up in a van, and they took us, back to prison. And so
in the middle of the night, probably, right?
Actually, it was in the wee hours of the morning.
Oh,
yeah, it was
okay.
early.
Yeah, it was early in the morning. it was
early.
still dark.
Yeah, it was still dark.
Yeah, only you guys weren't going out to pray. You guys were going going out to prison.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
I think that has to be like a standard or something. They did that in Florida too. Whenever I moved from jail to prison, it was just they woke us up, they banged on the cell, told you to get your stuff, and off you went. So
they did. That's how they did it. They did, and to be honest with you, I was actually ready to go from there because of the way I was feeling it. I was like, this has got to change. I don't want to be here. Let's just get back to the prison and maybe something will change. Maybe something will break. And man, it did. That first day I was back in prison, I went, and they were so overcrowded at that time that they sent you into this big, huge bay, and there were like 250 men, in one bay, one huge open bay with a bunch of bunks. And it was just going like down both sides of the wall. And then you had this middle where you went clear to the back, and that was all your facilities was back there. But there were just bunks lined up, just it seemed like for days.
Oh my goodness.
And so, I don't know, I was somewhere in the middle, and, this has been my third time back to prison, and had nothing else to give. I had no answers. And at this time it was like, I just needed to get away. I just needed to lay down. And I went and I laid down on my bunk. And it was like, when I did that, it was like all of the prayers, all of the supplications. I just recall all the times that my mother had been praying, and all the times she was out looking for me, all the times she put her arms around me when she knew that I was sick, when she knew that I just didn't have the strength to change and to change my behaviors and what I was doing. It all came back to me, and I just knew at that time that it was time. I knew that all of those prayers, that all of those that went out, I often would hear people that went to that were close to the family and were in the church at the time, and they would say, we're praying for you. And I can remember my mother even telling me, I didn't know what was going on with you last night. I didn't know what was going on, but I just called a few of our friends from the church, and we just started to pray. And I knew then that that's what this was, that those prayers finally made it to where they needed to go. And I can remember my mother even testifying at one point in time saying, I finally stopped praying that you would stop what you were doing. And I started praying that you would just get to wherever you needed to get to so that this could be over.
Man,
God, take him to where I stopped saying, take him out of this. And I started praying, take him to where he needs to go. And so, and that's what he did. And it just felt like at that time, that's what was happening, was those prayers were all starting to come back to me. And it was nothing that I had done. Except I knew that I felt different and that this was it.
That's awesome.
And it was very interesting because in a figure, I started to, of course, I had my eyes closed and I was crying like a baby. And I remember Jesus in such real form had came to me and he said, I never left you. I never left you. And that was very, 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 very powerful to me, because I think about all of those dark places that I had been, that nobody knew, the secret places that I had been in my life that I never thought I would go to, the depths of hell that I experienced from being out on drugs and being just in the darkness. And he said, I never left you.
Amen. Amen. Oh, man.
Amen. And that was so powerful to me. He showed me who he truly was at that time, but he only did it in a place that I was able to yield. He didn't do it when I was on my high horse. He didn't do it when I still had strength. He didn't do it when I was abounding in my life, when I had money, when I had everything going for me. He did it at the depth of my life, when he knew that I had ran out of resources and that that he was the resource that was going to deliver me from where I was at. And I unequivocally, completely surrendered my life to him right there that day. And eventually I got put in a different bay, but stayed another 4 months in diagnostic, where they process you basically before they send you to your camp that you're going to be at, your permanent camp. And so I stayed there 4 months on, we talked about this, it was 23-hour lockdown. I say 23 and a half because we only went out to eat, 3 hot meals, and then we went back into the cell.
So they wouldn't even let you have like a shower. They wouldn't even let.
The shower was actually in the bay, so you never left that bay.
Okay, so you're saying that the 23-hour lockdown was in the bay.
In that bay the whole time.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. No outside. We didn't go outside, and we left. When we did leave that bay, we just went right across the hall to the chow hall, and then we went right back into that bay again.
Okay. Well, because we had discussed before, is that whenever I was at Polk County Jail, so there it was a 24-hour lockdown. Well, it was 24-hour lockdown, and it was like like once every so many hours, I would get my hour out to be able to shower, to walk around, but it was within the confines of what you would consider a dorm.
Right.
So there was just big open area and then all the cells, but otherwise you were locked in a room pretty much no bigger than this, maybe like a little bit bigger than this, because you'd have to add, of course, a toilet and everything, but I was in this size for 24 hours straight. Yeah. And then, every once in a while getting an hour out, but
right.
Yeah, it's crazy. And we didn't get to go anywhere to get meals. They brought us our meals. They opened up the little slot on the door, and they shoved 3 trays in. They'd shut the door, and I'm in this room with 3 guys. So
yeah.
So
well, I guess maybe what I was going through wasn't so bad.
Did you have a TV at least? I mean,
no.
Oh yeah, I guess we did. We did have a TV, but it wasn't anything that we could control. Like I guess the guards would control it, but.
Again, we was in diagnostics, so this was not your permanent place, right? Everybody knew that went back to everybody, this was the epicenter for all the inmates that go back to prison or to prison that are going to be dispersed throughout the state of Missouri. And so I just didn't know where I was going. But everybody goes there first to get processed. And so my processing period was almost 4 months. Being in diagnostics, that's almost unprecedented to be in there that long. You're not supposed to be in there that long to be processed, but God was so good. I was where I needed to be. I read the Bible through probably 2 times while I was in there. Spent a lot of time by myself, spending time with the Lord, and just reading the Word. It was coming alive to me. I was ministering to my mother and to Kathy at this time. God was working on Kathy, and Kathy had gotten saved while I was locked up, and God was mending our relationship and restoring it while I was in prison.
Absolutely.
And so it was very interesting how the first time that I seen Kathy, how our relationship was so renewed. It was like I remember it was remembering her when I first met her again, and seeing her for what God had made her to be, and then just speaking to that, just being able to compliment her on those things and stuff like that, and stuff. And so I was locked up for maybe 9 months. I did end up going to a camp that had a wonderful ministry there. Got into the ministry there and was ministering and spending time on that ministry team, and just continuing to study God's word and preaching the word of God while we were in prison.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of inmates, get saved, and heard a lot of things around, the correctional institutions throughout Missouri, how people were getting saved, and even how some COs were getting saved by just being in the chapel
Very
at the
cool.
time of service and didn't even expect it, just heard the word and it melted their heart, and or it's in a time of worship, and it just melted their heart, and they gave their lives to Christ. I mean, we were seeing that
That's
at
awesome.
Boonville.
That's very cool. Yeah, I love it whenever God moves, especially like, because you think about it, in prison, you're kind of surrounded by the worst of the worst. It's kind of like everybody's there, and so sometimes you look at it, and if you don't keep prayed up, you don't keep your heart focused on the Lord, it's easy to turn around and say, man, I'm living in a devil area. I'm surrounded by evil.
Yeah.
And it's but the cool thing about that is that when you do that, you can actually, like, I used to be able to pick the guys out that I knew were Christians even before they even came out of their mouth, because out of so much evil, light would just almost emanate off of them. Like, you could tell who they were.
You could tell.
Yeah.
And even the evil in there could tell.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You couldn't be in between. Like, you couldn't be a guy that just, read the Bible and then you went out and was hanging out with the guys and doing what they were doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, they knew the difference between authentic and fake.
Mm-hmm.
And they seen that. And I think that God put a shield and a hedge of protection around me while I was in prison, because I was right there with the worst of the worst. And I seen it all. Anything about Boonville, it's not exactly the old man camp.
Oh, I know. You got to remember, all my prison time was in Florida, so yeah. I mean,
shout out to Boonville.
I don't know nothing about. See, the thing is that the only things that I know is whenever I had therapy group with some other guys, and they would talk about prison or Missouri prison, and it's just so different. Like,
sure.
I know that you guys had like TV. I mean, you guys could have like personal TVs, and we didn't. I mean, if it wasn't donated, you couldn't have it. It was pretty raw, but like, I agree with you. I was surrounded by some of the worst too, and man, God just protected me. And the only thing I miss, if I had to say I missed one thing about prison, and that would be the fact that, man, you saw God move.
Absolutely.
Like, it was like undeniable move. Yeah. Like, because life happens, and sometimes we get so caught up and we see God move, and it's kind of as we're flying down the road. Yep. It's like, okay, well, yeah, that was a God moment. But there, everything just runs so slow that it was like, man, that was God. Like, I seen I've told this story before. I seen a guy come into my dorm, and you could tell it was written on his face that he was just going to terrorize this place. And so I immediately started praying, and no sooner did I start the words started escaping me. He just got his stuff set on his bunk. They immediately called him back up there, and they sent him out to another dorm. Yeah. And I was like, thank you, Jesus. Yeah.
I've seen those movements before. God knows who his are. Yeah. That's for sure. Yeah. And no matter where we are, he follows through with his promises, and he's faithful to protect us to the end, because we're doing it, for his name's sake.
Absolutely. Right.
We're not living for ourselves. And I certainly was. And I spent another 9 months there at Boonville, and ended up getting out in October of 2005. Okay. Of course, God, in the last, few months that I was there, was really preparing my heart and my mind. I wasn't focused on getting out until I went to the parole board, because I knew it was getting close once I did. And it was awesome because, God at that time was already moving in Kathy and I's relationship and mending it and restoring it. And she ended up actually testifying at my PO hearing. And it was interesting because the very people that she was speaking to was basically saying, well, weren't you the reason why he's here? And now you stand before him and you're speaking on his behalf. And she said, absolutely, because God's did a work in his life. He's did a work in my life. And old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new. And so, I, of course, at that time was couldn't wait to share what God had did in my life. And it was more of about that than it was about anything else. Like, what are you going to do when you get out of here? Well, I mean, there was no conversation about that because they already knew. I mean, they could just see that there was a change in my life, the way that I was speaking. And so, I ended up getting, a letter, back from the parole board, fairly quickly. But it wasn't just a quick right now out date. I was in there like another couple of months after that. But God was preparing my heart at that time and transitioned me from the way that I was living there in a lot of isolation, a lot of, basically very simple living.
It's a monastery. If you treat it right, it's a monastery. So
right. There was a couple of times where I fasted for 3 days and I had the ability to be able to really focus on what God was doing and understood consecration. I began to understand the depth of God and how he works through isolation and just really learning, consecrating myself to him, in what would be not so simple life later on. And so he taught me that, being incarcerated. And so when I got out, I was fully prepared, to know what this was going to look like and be like. And I continued in my ways. I continued to consecrate myself. I continued to spend time with the Lord, when I got out, and it didn't matter. It was like, I was basically saying, God, you took care of my family while I was in there for a year. What's another 40 minutes praying? What's another 40 minutes spending time with just you? And so he blessed the family during that time, and I was out and the kids were growing in the Lord and was hearing a new word. They was, really, was cultivating the family that God had called us to have in the first place, and breaking curses and speaking to them and in the name of Jesus, and just casting down and tearing down. There was just a lot of things that I came back to that I seen were still the way that they were. And I seen that the need was still there to begin to speak and to minister. And so I basically got my eyes off of myself, right? It wasn't no more about, feeding me. And it was really about testifying of what great thing that God had did, in my life and sharing that with people. Right. And so the first thing that I ended up doing was getting into CR. I found a great family that, had went through some tragic stuff with losing a child, and they, had started a CR, ministry, here in town. And so, that's where God had me, sharing and feeding into people, or sharing with people. And just really, investing in their lives,
encouraging,
and praying over people. I learned how to pray over people. And so, God was really moving in the service of the ministry more so than, God, what can you give me? What can you do for me? And so, at any rate, time went on, man, and I learned how to pray. I was in a church that was a church of prayer, and where we spent a lot of time in prayer. People make fun of me now, they do, here in the church for praying long.
Oh man. The thing is though, they can keep quiet, man, because dude, you could pray for 40 minutes and it'd all be good stuff.
I blame that on those prayer sessions on Wednesday evening where it was just nothing else to do but pray.
Well, I blame, everybody, I know that some people like listening to me pray, and that's just because, when we had prayer circles at prison, and, and I, at some point, like I don't mind talking to Jesus. Let's talk to Jesus. Let's talk to him about some things. If we want to talk about some things, let's talk about some things. Yeah. There ain't you don't need to be timid around a man. Be reverent, but come to him boldly and talk to him. And
absolutely.
I know that people like to say, "Oh, you say long prayers," but I don't care. I've always, every time I ever hear that, I was like, you just let the man talk, because good stuff's coming out.
Yeah. Well, God's growing me in the short prayers too.
Yeah.
He's doing that as well. But, I learned in prison how to, minister to the Lord. I learned that there was so much more in spending time with him than give me, I need. And he showed me one time, even in a figure, he thought, he showed me in an illustration. Well, Shane, it would be like this. You come to my house and you need milk, but you don't come in and sit down. I open the door and you just grab the milk and you walk out. And he says, that's what prayer looks like sometimes. So I thought, okay, I'm going to come in. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to have a conversation, right? And not so much worry about what I was there for.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where we get into communion and get into spending time with the Lord. And so I really learned to be able to settle into the Lord and to realize that there's more than just give me. And one thing I really realized by being in the presence of God is that all the things that I thought I needed
were the things we needed.
They fended for themselves. It took care of itself because I was in the presence of God. I mean, it literally was the presence of God is what delivered me from the very thing I thought that I needed. And a lot of times I didn't need that at all. Yeah. You know, I maybe needed it because I didn't have enough of him.
Yeah.
But I just realized that being in his presence was that was all I needed.
Yeah, you came in looking for the milk, and it wasn't the milk that you needed. It was his presence sitting in there having a conversation with. That's what you needed. You know, he's already sent somebody over there baking whatever you were going to bake anyways.
It's already ready. It's already ready. What do you need the milk for when you got the whole cake? Right?
That's right. That's right. Why do you need the milk when you got the whole cake? So, man, that's awesome. So, where are we up to in your life right now? Are we getting to the point of?
We're right there, man. I tell you, the only other thing, you know, that I would say in terms of like when I first got out is before I got out, I was in a worship. I was in what we call a worship session at the time in Boonville at the chapel, and I remember the Spirit of God saying, "You will be back here, but you won't be back in gray." And I was like, oh, "That's awesome, right?" And I just started to have a burden for my heart to coming back to the prisons, and so got the opportunity to do that through the late Bill Long, and just being able to spend time with that man and just the heart that he had for God at such an age that he was at, and still to be able to have that fervency to serve. Man, I just gravitated to him, and he took me under his wing, and we was able to get into the prisons again and be able to minister to those guys. And so that was great and stuff. And of course now, like you said earlier, you know, met a lot of great people on this worship team, man, and just cannot, you know, just thank God enough and thank you guys for just, you know, being so willing and so just dedicated and obedient to the Lord to be able to meet each week, man, and just do this over and over again.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
And you know what? Speaking of worship, man, you have really grown. Like just from the time that I've known you, like, I mean, when you started, you didn't sing a lot of, you know, main stuff, and then when you started singing main stuff, I mean, it was all right. And then now it's just like, man, I like Shane on that song. That's really good stuff. And you blow me away sometimes. It's great.
Thanks,
I love watching people grow musically, and I know, and I'm sure that it comes from your worshipful heart. I know where that comes from. God's like, you know what? He's gonna worship me like that. I'm gonna make sure he has a voice to back that up.
Right.
So
right. Well, one secret that I'll tell you that I know where God kind of changed some things is I was a very timid singer. It was, you know, I if I had to lead, it was like, okay, I'll lead, but you know, I really don't want to. And he's like, you got to quit doing that. You got to, if you're going to sing it, you got to sing it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We'll fix things along the way, but you got to quit singing with timidity, you know, with that timidness. And so, that was one thing that grew me, was just being able to own it. Right. Yeah. And so that helped a bunch.
And, so one of the things I also wanted to talk about was the fact that at some point, you became a deacon for our church.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Man, it's just such a blessing. You know, just how being grounded where God's put you, and just, you know, doing the work of the calling, and just constantly just wearing that thankfulness, you know, just on my shirt, it's just always having that thankfulness is what I guess keeps me grounded, And so, yeah, it was, I don't know, it's probably been 3 maybe years ago, Mark had came to me and said, man, we really been praying about this and want you to be on our deacon ministry. Yeah. Right. And so that was awesome. And just being able to get our own group of people that we can, pour into and pray with and share with and stuff, and was really awesome as well. And just being able to call people. I think one time we went out and just started praying went to their homes and just started praying, and we asked them if could we do this, and that was part of our deacon ministry as well, is just going to people's homes and just praying for them, praying over their home without actually knocking on the door and disturbing them or whatever. We would just drive around and just pray into these places. And that was awesome and stuff. And just being able to do life with people, and come out of my comfort zone has been a work of God.
That was awesome. Cause I remember whenever I got the news that you had become a deacon, and I was like, man, cause to be quite honest, I looked up to you a lot just because, you basically, maybe not the same situation. We didn't do the same things, but I mean, we pretty much, walked the path out where we lost it all and we found Christ, and we went into prison saying, okay, we're going to do this the right way. And, we sat down and we laid those foundations, and then we got out and we're, still trying to pursue Christ with everything we have. And so whenever I found out that you became a deacon, I was like, man, that is awesome. I am, I'm jealous. I'll be honest. I was a little jealous. I was like, man, that is cool. I thought that was awesome, but it's just like, it's just another testimony to God that, that God can take anybody and use him for his glory. And
absolutely.
And no matter what your background is, so, or what you've done. So I was just, it was awesome. It was awesome to see. It was awesome to see that. Cause I don't know. I don't know if anybody would say, okay, well, he was a convicted felon. Can we make him a deacon? Because a lot of people may even put that into mind, but that's another reason why I love our church is because it's like, they don't even put that in their mind. It's like, okay, he's faithful. Every time he's here, we leave encouraged. Every time he talks, we leave encouraged. Yeah. So, at the end of the day, that was how I felt. I was like, man, that man encourages people a lot. There's no reason why he shouldn't be a deacon.
And I can't think of one man that would ever say that their salvation came by all the great things that they did.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right? All the good works that they've done. I was saved by that.
Yeah,
God just came and he saved me, right? Yeah. And so I think there's just such a conviction for understanding where our salvation comes from.
Yeah.
And just resounding those words as the Apostle Paul said, I didn't come to you in eloquency of speech. I didn't come to you as being a Pharisee. I came to you trembling, actually.
Yeah.
And in the power of God. And that's what changes people, is the power of God. What changed me was the power of God. What transforms us is the very power of God. And so, when you think about it in that respect, it's like, well, how do you put a measure on the power of God? How do you say?
You can't. You can't measure that.
Yeah. So I just live by the grace of God and the power that resides in me.
The other thing that I wanted to bring up, because it's been on my mind, was the fact that here like a couple weeks ago, Sunday, you had a couple of your kids get baptized, man.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
That was amazing, awesome. Man.
Oh man, that was awesome. I'm without words on that one, man. For real. Mark had came to me and said, hey, I want you to do that. I want you to baptize your own kids. And I was like, okay, let me think about it, let me pray on it, but, at the time it was just like, how can I not do this?
Yeah.
And it was such a good moment, and we're still kind of living off of that. It was just like, it wasn't just the manna for that day, man. It was like after that happened, it was like God had cultivated like a tree of fruit in our home, which was awesome. Now we're still picking off of that thing, man. And so It just isn't something that just went away. I think it was something that he's growing and building. It was good fruit for our home. We still talk about it, and we're still living off of that, man. I mean, I'm still praying with Destiny.
That's okay, because that's Sabbath manna, man. That's supposed to last twice as long, so you can live off of that for a little bit.
You got it. Absolutely. That's right. That's right.
So normally what I do is, so at the end of it, I kind of ask you questions, kind of going back over your testimony. So for somebody that, and I always get the wording wrong on these, so you're going to have to help me with it. So when you talked about that acceptance, so for somebody that could be struggling with that could be struggling with going through the fact that, that's what they need is acceptance. How could you encourage them in that, in people that need that acceptance?
Right. Man, that is a great question. That's a great question, because it was the very thing that I was struggling with at that time was being accepted. And, one of those things that I would tell someone who is struggling with that is just know that the Lord has a plan for your life. Just know that the one who is the greatest of all, the very one who created you in his image. And anybody tells you anything different, they're a lie. That is a lie from Satan. That if there's doubts of not performing well or not living up to what maybe your mother or father thought that you would be, and you're dealing with that, just know that the very Creator created you in his image. Everything else is a lie.
Oh yes, absolutely. I completely agree with you, and I that's a great word of encouragement. The next thing we get into is, kind of, because I know that you said that your first two kids was with Kathy and you guys weren't married yet,
right.
and then of course you had two more and you got married before that. So
yeah.
Let's see, how do I want to go with this? So for somebody that, well, they're not ready for marriage. They're not ready for marriage yet. What kind of words could you use to, how would you encourage those people?
Yeah, because I was there, right? I mean, to say, oh, I love my kids, I love my woman that I'm with, but I'm not ready for marriage, is really a lack of commitment. That's really what's happening there. Is it's a lack of giving yourself completely to your mate, giving yourself completely to your wife or your husband. And, one thing that I would say in that is the greatest gift and the greatest blessing that you're going to receive from being with your wife or being with your husband is fully committing yourself. The very thing that God honors is in your willingness to fully commit, to fully yield to that marriage. And you can't do that if you're not getting married. I mean, the marriage thing is just, people say it's just a piece of paper, but it's really not, because there's a reason why you're still not committing.
Yeah.
Right. There's still a reason why. And if it's you, so I've heard people say, it's me, it's not her. All right. It's me, it's not him. But it still goes back to that lack of ability to commit and something that I'm still holding on to, something they're still holding on to. So I would say to trust the process and to understand that God has made a man and a woman to be married. And in that very commitment that he's made is what he honors. And what he honors, he blesses. But if it's not in that, then just know why your marriage isn't blessed, or why your relationships aren't blessed. Absolutely. It's because of not fully committing and trusting the process of God, trusting the very thing that God has put his hand on. Yeah.
And the last question, of course, has to be with, like you said, running the streets and alcohol. I hear so many times people thinking that's they feel like that's it. That's what you do in life. You run the streets, you drink.
Right.
What can you say to encourage people that's their mindset?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a tough one because people may even feel like or think, yeah, I already know that this is no good. I already know that it could lead to destruction. I already know that it's a no good way of living, but I like it, and I'm going to do it anyway. And so, one thing that I've ministered to people, because about every friend that I ever had partied with, what we used to call kick it with, hung out on the streets with, are still doing that. And to be honest with you, I don't know how they're still hanging in there. But for those who are still doing it, like I say, I still speak to some of those guys and stuff, and still see them from time to time. And I just tell them, that there is a better way. There's a better way. And if you don't see it, or if you don't care about it, then care about the blessing of God. Care about, people around you. Care about how you can impact other people's lives, just in the very same way that God has used me to impact other people's lives. And so there is certainly a better way, is what I would tell people. And because it's the very thing that I have told the people that I ran around with to this day, is there is a better way. And if you don't care, somebody does care, and you're going to impact somebody's life by you changing. And you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And I often try to tell people too that I was living that way. I felt that way until I understood and experienced the power of God. When I understood and experienced the power of God, it decimated my old thoughts. And I oftentimes refer back to Scripture and say, if any man be in Christ, he's a new creature. Old things pass away. Behold, all things become new. How do you think that happens? It's the power of God. And so you don't know what you don't know. But man, it's just continuing to just pour into people and minister to people, and just to set the example for people. That's all we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, and I'm blessed, man, because you, like I said, you encourage me, and really just gives me more to shoot for. Every time we talk, man, I feel like,
absolutely,
man, it helps encourage me, and like, okay, we can do this. So
yeah.
But man, I've been very encouraged by this, and I know that there's going to be people that are going to, they're going to be encouraged by what you had to say.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you for encouraging me, letting the Lord speak through you. And I appreciate you coming on here, speaking in spirit and truth, man.
Thanks for having me, Robert, man. I appreciate it. And I appreciate all that you're doing too, man. You're just really paving the way for the ministry in your own lane, man. And I appreciate that as well.
Well, it's all glory to God.
You got a heart for the Lord, man. And I like that. I think that's what, draws me to you, man, is you got a heart to serve, man.
I try, man. I really do. So, well, guys, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed Shane's testimony. If you have any questions or comments you would like to share with Shane, please email the iammatthewpodcast@gmail.com, and we will get them to him. I'm thankful that you guys all took the time to listen to the podcast. Keep sharing with others, but above all, keep putting God first, live for Him, and watch Him move in your life.